Support Utah businesses now and be part of Utah's thriving economy. More information can be found at slchamber.com. That's slchamber.com.
My doctor told me my cholesterol is borderline, so I took control with Garlic Healthy Cholesterol Formula. Garlic helps maintain healthy cholesterol safely and naturally. It's odor and taste-free, and Garlic is a world leader in garlic potency. I'm taking charge of my cholesterol with Garlic Healthy Cholesterol Formula, cholesterol's natural enemy.
These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. The term natural references only the garlic in the product. Use as directed.
I'm Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I learned about atrial fibrillation the hard way. My symptoms would come and go. Shortness of breath, fatigue. I kept going. Then I got so lightheaded, I couldn't. My doctor said I have AFib, so I'm about 5 times more likely to have a stroke. Other symptoms, irregular heartbeat, heart racing, chest pain can come and go, but the risk of stroke stays. If you have symptoms, tell a doctor. Visit notimetowait.com.
Sponsored by Bristol-Myers Squibb and Pfizer.
Traffic and weather together, brought to you by Dino Day. Celebrate on June 1st at all Sinclair locations. And here's Ricky Meese.
We are back to a crash-free commute on your Valley freeways and main secondaries. Road work causing some slowdowns in both directions in the Daybreak area near Mountain View, and Highway 189 closed in both directions for the next several hours at the upper portion of Deer Creek Reservoir. Celebrate spring and a clean home. Call Zero Res and get one room cleaned starting at just $25 with a 4-room minimum. Visit ZeroRes.com and book your appointment today. Zero Res. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
It'll be cool today with a high in the low 60s. Then tomorrow, warmer, high 76. Cool again on Thursday with a chance of showers. 58 degrees, partly cloudy right now. I'm Dan Bomas from the KSL Common Spirit Health Studios. Listen online at kslnewsradio.com. We're Utah's news, traffic, and weather station.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
The headlines often focus on the persistent achievement gap between high poverty and affluent schools, and that remains one of the big pressing challenges that faces the education system in our country. And maybe it's time to think again about the funding disparities and the results that come out of that funding. So let's think again. Let's begin.
Think you know the news of the day? Think again with Boyd Matheson on KSL News Radio.
Well, we want to make sure we're thinking again about what we think we know when it comes to education, particularly funding. We often talk about the fact that we have schools in tough socioeconomic places that are struggling, and often the answer is to dump more money in, and that's not necessarily the correlation or the thing that we ought to be focused on. Emma Kemp, of course, is the assistant editor at Reason, has a fantastic piece on the complexities of all of this and what is underfunded, what's overfunded, and what's actually producing results. And Emma, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great piece as always. And let's start with just kind of the baseline in terms of we do kind of have that consistent battle going on between who's getting properly funded and what do we do in these high poverty schools. Give us the lay of the land.
So there's a really common misconception when it comes to education policy and just what people, on the street think is happening in schools, which is that the reason why high poverty schools underperform is because they're underfunded. There's this really persistent idea that schools that have a lot of poor kids, they're crummy, the teachers aren't very good, the students aren't performing well because they don't have enough money. But that is just generally not true. There was some research that came out that found that when you consider local, state, and federal funding, there's only 3 states in the entire United States that give less money to there are only 3 states where poor schools get less money. So, in fact, high poverty schools actually get more per pupil funding than wealthier schools in all but 3 states. And there's some more research that came out recently that I wrote about that found that when you compare high poverty schools to low poverty schools, there's basically no statistically significant difference in the funding. That research also, they did find a small funding gap when comparing schools in one metro area to each other. So, for example, say like they would look at the Salt Lake City metro area and compare the wealthiest school in that area to the poorest school, relatively speaking, and they did find a small gap. But that meant because they're comparing within a metro district, say a metro area that has a much higher than average median income, their poorest school in that area might only have average poverty. So when it comes to the schools that poor kids are actually attending, they're not underfunded. However, they do perform significantly worse. And that's because figuring out how to help lower income kids, lower income schools succeed is often much more complicated than meets the eye. Some of it comes down to accountability. A lot of high poverty schools tend to spend their money less responsibly. They sometimes pour a lot more money into teacher benefits or in building maintenance. There just isn't as good of a use of the funding. And then there's also the fact that, if you have a group of kids who maybe a lot of them are in unstable families, unstable housing situations, their parents didn't have the time to be able to read to them when they were small. It's just going to be a lot harder to pull them up to a baseline than kids who are coming in with parents who, where they have a much more stable family home situation and with parents who can do things like read to them and help them with their homework.
Yeah, so let's unpack some of that, because I think you've got us to rethink about a whole class of things, which is what you always do, which is why we love to have you on the show, because we do have to I just want to break that back down in terms of what are the things that are inhibiting and what are the things that we should actually be talking about in terms of help, because the goal, I think everybody's on board with the goal. We especially want to help those kids in tough social economic classes, poor schools, poor areas. We want to make sure they have that opportunity for upward mobility, and education is such a crucial part of that. But I want to walk back through some of the things you pointed out in your piece in terms of just the responsibility, the accountability in terms of how funds are spent. Just unpack that a little bit for us in terms of what you saw, what you found, in terms of how the money gets spent, knowing that it's pretty equal across both wealthy areas and poor schools.
Yeah, so this is quite complicated, but a lot of it comes down to some of the researchers I've spoken to have theorized that higher poverty schools might spend more money on teacher benefits. They might spend more money on facilities. And, when it comes to getting those results, parents in higher poverty school districts often they don't have the same ability to demand the kind of results that you might get from parents who have a little bit more wealth and therefore have a little bit more extra time to focus on their kids' education. This is actually part of why this is a different issue, but I think in recent years there's been a push to frame the school choice movement as something that's for and by sort of like wealthy white parents, but in fact the modern school choice movement was led and created by working class Black parents who were in a situation where their kids were attending these really high poverty schools that were just failing their kids, and they didn't have the extra money to move to a better area or send their kids to private schools, and so they pushed for the modern sort of charter school choice movement. So it's quite complicated. It's hard to nail down any particular issue, and it's not necessarily that money doesn't matter. It's that, it often doesn't get spent in quite the way we would want it to.
Yeah. And in some cases, I think it's just as it is in business, cash flow can cover a multitude of problems. When you think you have it, it just depends on where you spend it and what other problems are creeping up. And I think as we look at this in terms of the kids and improving performance, which of course is the goal in all of this. And I love the fact that you closed out your piece saying, look, it's not that we shouldn't make sure we're spending equally, or that there's at least a good balance there. But there are some other things that we ought to be focused on instead of just, hey, are they funded or underfunded? That's not the only question we should be asking.
Right, exactly. We should be looking at what's actually happening in schools. Pedagogy is important. Classroom management is important. There are so many factors that really, really come into play. Another is competition, right? This is also why wealthier school districts tend to do better because, if you're a principal at a very low poverty school, that the parents of the kids that you're teaching, if they don't like the results, they can move somewhere else. They can pull their kids out and put them in private schools. And so there's a sense that if you know that you can lose students if you're not getting the results that parents want, you're going to put a little bit more pressure on your teachers. You're going to be shopping around for what's the best possible curriculum. Whereas if you have, a school district where the parents are dealing with so many other things, there's much more family instability. There isn't that same pressure. And, the parents can't afford to send their kids to private schools if they don't like what you're doing. It's much easier to, become a little bit more lax.
Yeah. Great insight, as always, Emma Camp, assistant editor at Reason. You can check out her piece, Are Poor Schools Underfunded? It's more complex than you'd think. Always helping us to think again. Emma, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, that's Emma Camp, assistant editor at Reason. It's a great piece. It's challenging the myths about high-poverty schools, where the funds are coming. Again, if you take the local, the state, and the federal money coming in, whether it's a high-poverty school or an affluent school, it really is more nuanced. A lot of it has to do with what is being done, how are the funds being used, what's the support system for those students. I think that's a huge part of this conversation. But sometimes we just try to make it a class warfare issue as opposed to what is in the best student welfare issue, and make sure that all our students have an opportunity to rise, to thrive, and ultimately to succeed. We'll be right back.
Think again on Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson.
For kids like Bryson, Afu, Liz, and Noah, healing has a home.
It's not like home, but it just felt like a home.
Hear their stories during this year's Give-a-thon.
I'm beyond grateful for Primary Children's.
I didn't feel scared or anything because I knew that they'd take care of me.
It's one of a kind.
Join us and be inspired.
I'm very happy they saved my kid, and that's something I can never repay.
The Give-a-thon for Primary Children's Hospital.
This Thursday on KSL News Radio.
Hey, have you saved more than $200,000 in an IRA or 401k? You may not realize it now, but you've got a big problem on your hands. And that problem is taxes. Because if you don't take advantage of some tax planning strategies now, Uncle Sam could take a big chunk of your hard-earned retirement savings. Learn how you could reduce the taxes on your IRA and 401k with a free retirement tax savings analysis. It's from Boss Retirement Solutions. If you've saved more than $200,000, schedule your free tax strategy session now by calling 801-896-9622. Discover the tax planning strategies that could dramatically reduce your taxes in retirement. Call 801-896-9622. That's 801-896-9622.
Advisory services offered through Boss Retirement Advisors, an SEC-registered investment advisory firm. Insurance products and services offered through Boss Retirement Solutions.
Healthcare with human kindness is here. It's at Common Spirit Health. Hospitals, clinics, and caregivers all connected to advance healthcare in Colorado, Kansas, and Utah. Together, we have a common purpose, partnering with you in health and healing using powerful medicine, powerful technology, and the greatest power of all, human kindness. You'll know it when you see it, because human kindness is in every care site and in every caregiver. Common Spirit Health. Hello, human kindness.
Looking for a secure retirement plan without market risk? Look no further. Lyle Boss, president of Boss Financial, specializes in no market risk retirement strategies with guarantees of principal, guaranteed growth, and lifelong income. Join Lyle right here each Saturday and Sunday for his Safe Money radio show, and call him now at 855-355-SAFE for your complimentary customized Safe Money information kit and Safe Money book. Nothing but upside here at 855-355-SAFE.
The Management Minute is a service of the MBA program in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. I'm Scott Hammond. Years ago, I saw a successful business partnership in an ugly breakup because one of the partners had been dishonest. To my surprise, I recently learned that the two partners were doing business together again and being very successful. So I had to ask. A partner told me that their new partnership was working very well, not because of the ironclad agreements written by attorneys, but because of forgiveness. He said you cannot underestimate the bond that forgiving another creates. In families, would we be as close, as bonded if we did not forgive? Well, the same is true in business. We're all flawed, and we all need second chances. Learn more about how to make your business relationships work with an MBA degree from Utah State University.
Go to UtahStateMBA.com. That's UtahStateMBA.com.
I'm Scott Hammond. Hope to see you in one of our classes.
I'm getting vaccinated with Prevnar 20, a Pfizer vaccine.
So am I, because I'm at risk for pneumococcal pneumonia.
If you're 19 or older with chronic conditions like asthma, diabetes, COPD, or heart disease, or are 65 or older, you are at increased risk for pneumococcal pneumonia. Ask your doctor or pharmacist about Prevnar 20, pneumococcal 20-valent conjugate vaccine. It can help protect you against pneumococcal pneumonia in just one dose. Even if you've already been vaccinated with other pneumonia vaccines, Prevnar 20 may help provide added protection. Prevnar 20 is approved for adults to help prevent infections from 20 strains of the bacteria that cause pneumococcal pneumonia. Continued approval may depend on a supportive study. Don't get Prevnar 20 if you've had a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine or its ingredients. Adults with weakened immune systems may have a lower response to the vaccine. Side effects include pain and swelling at the injection site, fatigue, headache, muscle, and joint pain. For full prescribing information, please call 1-855-213-2138 or visit Prevnar20.com.
There's never been a better time to test drive that Hyundai you've always wanted. You're your journey. Own every mile in a brand new Hyundai. Visit buyhyundai.com or see your Utah Hyundai dealer today.
With the three things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, search teams have recovered the body of a driver after his truck ran into Deer Creek Reservoir overnight. Second, police say a suspect was killed when he was shot by police during a kidnapping incident. And third, former President Trump didn't have a lot to say once today's court session wrapped up in the hush money trial. 58 degrees, partly cloudy in Salt Lake City. And back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Get deeper insights on the news from Inside Sources.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. It's great to be with you today. As always, I am Boyd Matheson, and in our increasingly technology-driven world, the rapid advancements in artificial intelligence have opened up some fairly intriguing possibilities, including some disturbing possibilities, I think, when it comes to AI. And I think there's some profound questions in that as we navigate our way through so much of the AI space. There's also things that I think will reconnect us even more radically as human beings, which I think is the real critical piece of the puzzle there. Jessica Gross, opinion writer for the New York Times, covers family, religion, education, culture, and the way we live now. A fantastic piece. You need to go check this out at the NewYorkTimes.com. Loneliness is a problem that AI won't solve. And Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a powerful piece, and I love where you just began. So I just want you to walk us through kind of the baseline of what launched you on this path, because I think that's intriguing in and of itself. And then we'll dig into some of the whys and hows and what comes next.
Sure. So I reported a 4-part series about educational technology, and my conclusion with that series was basically, yes, we can use some technology, but a lot of it has not been thoughtfully implemented. And thoughtful implementation of any technological tools is key. And so now we are on the precipice of another new technology, AI. And while I was researching this EdTech series, I found an article from the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, and it was called, Not a Computer, It's a Companion, ! And I found this to be one of the more disturbing things that I had ever read, because the long and short of it is it tried to argue that one day AI will be better than a real girlfriend. It quotes someone who already has a romantic involvement with a chatbot, and this person says, the great thing about AI is that it's constantly evolving. One day it will be better than a real girlfriend. One day the real one will be the inferior choice.
Wow.
And I just, every fiber of my being was just like, yikes.
Yeah, exactly. What could possibly go wrong there?
Right. And I obviously value human connection incredibly deeply. And I started thinking more about what relationships really are and what loneliness really is. And so as I started to read more about this, I had seen lots of suggestion that, especially for older people who may be more socially isolated, there's some evidence that there's more older people who are living alone and are not part of communities. There's some suggestion that, lifelike robots, chatbots may help them to feel less lonely. And after talking to psychologists and sociologists, I feel that really misunderstands what loneliness is. And so the way that I define loneliness in the piece, and there are actually a lot of disagreements among experts and academics about exactly what loneliness is, but sort of a broadly accepted definition is that loneliness is both an embodied feeling, so people really miss human touch, they miss hugs. This was something that came up a lot during the pandemic when people were social distancing, but it is also a signal to your brain and your body that you need to go out and connect with other humans. And so the concern that I have, and that, some of the folks that I talk to have, is that what chatbots could potentially do is blunt that urge. So it will make you feel entertained or not bored enough to blunt that desire to go out and meet actual humans, but it will not actually solve loneliness or satisfy that feeling. It will be sort of a temporary salve. Because the only thing that can make you really feel less lonely are other people.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that I loved in your piece was this whole area around nuance, that no matter how good the chatbot becomes, there are elements, the nuance pieces of our relationships and that human interaction that just can't be replaced by anything, as you said, other than another human being.
Well, humans are surprising. And they're complicated. And I think you are fully engaged when you're really relating to another person because you can't control it. You don't know what's going to happen next. And there's just, I don't think even as sophisticated as a chatbot might get, that you can have that same sort of responsiveness and feeling and real engagement that you have when you're really connecting with people in the public sphere, and not just people that you already know, strangers, people, I talked to Eric Kleinenberg, who is a sociologist. He has written multiple books about social connectiveness. And I don't remember if this made it into the piece, but he talked a lot about these little interactions that we have through our day with the clerk at the grocery store, with somebody walking down the street that you say hello to, and that those make us feel part of the fabric of a community that, a chatbot just can't. We're asking them to do too much, honestly.
Yeah. Well,
why are we putting all that on them?
That's right. That's a big responsibility for a chatbot to take all of that on. But it is that connective tissue, and I agree. I think there's an element of all of this that you might be able to blunt it. I think it's almost more of a distraction than it is anything else, because that connective tissue. In a community, in a neighborhood, in a relationship, whether it's family or as you said, the stranger on the street, there's just something about that interconnectedness that does make you feel more alive, that does go beyond, again, anything that a chatbot might be able to deliver for you.
And, I want to be really clear. I think that there are things that AI can probably really help with. I think, I've been impressed by some of the medical uses. I've been impressed by things like the way that chatbots can help people who are visually impaired. Like, I am really trying to keep an open mind to sort of any new technology. But, my fear is that the people who are creating these technologies aren't properly thinking through the unintended consequences of them.
Yeah, no question. Great stuff. Wonderful piece. Jessica Gross, opinion writer for the New York Times, and check that out at NewYorkTimes.com today. Jessica, thanks so much for joining us. Fantastic conversation. We look forward to having you back. This was one that won't go away, and there's a lot of interesting nuances we want to get to. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, and that's Jessica Gross from the New York Times. And one of the things that she quoted in her piece that I just loved, that from one of the experts that she interviewed, talked about the fact that it's our social failure that has created the space for AI and for technology to fill the void. As Jessica mentioned, there's the things that took place during the pandemic. There was that withdrawal. There was that disconnection from human touch and relationship and that kind of interaction and dynamic. And not everybody has gone full scale back into all of those things that make that connection. I also always go back to my conversation with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs from the UK before he passed away. He talked about it in the context of having two things going on. Of course, we had this big climate change. We had heat and fire and all of that going on, but we also have this Arctic frost going on in terms of loneliness, in terms of indifference, in terms of disconnection. And so those are also things that we have to do that I don't think AI will be able to solve. There's always going to be the need for that human connection. And when we let the muscle of that connective tissue in our society atrophy, there's a whole other host of problems beyond loneliness that are sure to follow. All right, we'll step aside for some bottom of the hour news. More Inside Sources coming up next. Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's 1:30 at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bonas. KSL's top local story this hour. Search teams have now recovered the body of a truck driver from Deer Creek Reservoir. The driver died when a tanker truck went off the road and into the water. Rescue teams had to wait until propane had vented from the truck before they could get into the water. Highway 189 past Deer Creek is still closed. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. The Secretary of State was presenting his budget to a congressional committee this morning when he was interrupted by a protester.
The President's FY25 budget.
Genocide in Gaza. There have been 7 mass graves outside of hospitals. This is sick. This is deranged. You are a war criminal. Shame on you.
Secretary Anthony Blinken and committee members said during the hearing that they reject the effort by the International Criminal Court to arrest the Prime Minister of Israel along with the leaders of Hamas. Your money at this moment, the Dow Jones average up on the day 57 points. The NASDAQ is up around 20. And our KSL weather is going to be warm and cool off and on. That's next. KSL News Time, 1:31.
News doesn't just mean information or dates.
It's the story of our local history being told in real time.
Be a part of the story. This is Tim Hughes and Amanda Dixon.
We hope to be a part of your story. We have you covered on KSL News Radio.
I'm still going for it, even with higher stroke risk from atrial fibrillation and a regular heartbeat not caused by a heart valve problem. Over a 3-year study, Eliquis apixaban tablets reduced stroke risk better than warfarin, and over 97% of Eliquis patients did not experience a stroke. A first stroke occurred in 2.9% of warfarin patients versus 2.3% of Eliquis patients.
Don't stop taking prescription Eliquis without asking your doctor. It may increase your stroke risk. Eliquis can cause serious and in rare cases fatal bleeding. Don't take Eliquis if you have an artificial heart valve, abnormal bleeding, or antiphospholipid syndrome. While taking, you may bruise more easily or take longer for bleeding to stop. A spinal injection while on Eliquis increases risk of blood clots, which may cause paralysis, the inability to move. Get medical help right away for unexpected bleeding, unusual bruising, or tingling, numbness, or muscle weakness. Medications such as aspirin products, NSAIDs, SSRIs, SNRIs, and blood thinners may increase bleeding risk. Tell your doctor about all planned medical or dental procedures. Learn more at Eliquis.com or call 1-855-ELIQUIS.
If your water heater's over 10 to 15 years old, congratulations. You've beat the average. What's up, everybody? I'm Mike Wilson with Any Hour Services, and I love hearing stories of people having water heaters that are really old and they're still doing their job. Unfortunately, most of us won't be that lucky. And when water heaters fail, it's usually in spectacularly inconvenient fashion. Whether it's an unexpected cold shower when we're already running late for work, or worse yet, coming home to a flooded basement, it's never fun. If you'd like to look into replacing your water heater before it fails, Any Hour Services is having a sale for any homeowners listening. Whether you're looking for a new tanked water heater or you want to see what upgrading to a tankless would cost, the plumbers at Any Hour Services can show you what options are available. And right now, you can save $400 on a tanked water heater or $1,200 on a tankless. If you think you might be interested, call Any Hour Services today and schedule your free estimate. 801-443-7400. You can Google Any Hour Services. You can even schedule online at anyhourservices.com. No one helps more homeowners than Any Hour Services.
Advertising used to be simple. Your options were radio, TV, newspaper, and let's not forget the yellow pages. Now it seems like a tidal wave of options.
Podcast, cable TV, streaming, OTT, CTV, audio network, smart speakers. On top of that, you need digital marketing for your website along with SEM, SEO, display, video, YouTube, email, and all the social media platforms.
Look, you're the expert in your business. Wouldn't it be nice to have an expert to market you? We are Bonneville Salt Lake, the local marketing and media company you know and trust. We reach customers across all digital and social platforms and have the reach of traditional advertising available as well. We find your customer anytime, any place, anywhere on any device here in Utah or anywhere in the world. We work to optimize your results with our in-house local team of experts, providing you with qualified leads, not just impressions. Contact Stephanie Palmer at KSL for a free consultation, including a complete digital audit with no obligation or cost to you. Email spalmer@ksl.com. That's spalmer@ksl.com.
Traffic and weather together brought to you by Dino Day. Celebrate on June 1st at all Sinclair locations. And here's Ricky Meese.
Delays northbound on I-15, leaving Clearfield on the way to 5600 South Roy. Getting into Weber County, that's going to take you an extra 5 minutes or so. Valley Freeway traffic in Salt Lake County looks good. And again, Highway 189 still closed in both directions at the upper portion of Deer Creek Reservoir by Charleston. UDOT has estimated the reopening at possibly 7 o'clock this evening. Advanced Window Products, $2,500 off 10 windows or more. AdvancedWindows.com. Affordable windows guaranteed. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
Cool today with a high in the low 60s, then warmer tomorrow with a high of 76, but cool again on Thursday with a chance of showers. And right now, 58 degrees, partly cloudy. I'm Dan Bomas from the KSL Common Spirit Health Studios. Listen online at kslnewsradio.com. We're Utah's news, traffic, and weather station.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Well, I've heard a lot of interesting pejoratives, including the word uniparty of late, both on the left and on the political right, as it relates to just those who might be in the squishy middle or the go-along-to-get-along crowd. But we want to look at it differently. We want to look at it in terms of American foreign policy and what a uniparty mentality actually means and what it's actually doing, the impact it's having as it relates to foreign policy. This is an important conversation. Dalibor Rojas, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, studies European political and economic trends, and has a great piece on the uniparty, and it's not what you think. So this is one more think again moment we're going to deliver to you today. And Dalibor, welcome to the program.
Boyd, it's great to be with you.
I love the way you frame this out in terms of this is not the uniparty you were thinking of, because it's a very different thing when it comes to foreign policy. So for our listeners, just kind of describe what it is.
Also, traditionally, uniparty in the area of foreign policy referred to the sort of consensus that was supposedly dragging America into needless and endless wars. The sort of concern that Democrats and Republicans want to just, change governments around the globe and drag Americans into conflicts in which we have little stakes. That perhaps was true 20 years ago around the time of the Iraq War, but it's certainly no longer true today. And if there is a bipartisan consensus, if there is a sort of common theme to Democratic and Republican approaches to foreign policy, it has to do with a lack of a broader strategic vision, a lack of staying power, lack of focus, and the willingness to be constantly distracted and move on to the next thing. And I think that makes us very unreliable ally in some ways, very unpredictable partner. And I think as of late, it has also been very much encouraging our adversaries to try and push the envelope.
This is so important. I want to unpack a few pieces of this. I love the way you framed it in your Wall Street Journal piece, that it's this lack of initiative, this desire to do things kind of until the next shiny object comes along, and that we often run out of energy before we run out of opportunity in these places. And as you said and pointed out so powerfully, that it's often causing us to be a really poor ally and friend to our friends, and it emboldens our enemies around the world. And you gave some great examples again, kind of both left and right politically, but in terms of just where we are as it relates both to Israel and then also to Ukraine. Describe that for us.
So there are many different components. This one is, as you said, the lack of initiative. So we very often worry about what is the next thing that Vladimir Putin will do, or Xi Jinping, or the mullahs of Iran. Very rarely, I think we give them reasons to worry about what we might do next. Very rarely it is that we take initiative in these crises that are unfolding around the globe. Very often we are in a reactive mode. The other part of it has to do with our staying power. So, we left Afghanistan after 19 years. I think that gave the sense to all kinds of bad actors that Americans can be just waited out. And we see that already in Ukraine. The commitment to help for as long as it takes now looks more like a commitment to help for 3 years max, and not help too much, because that might perhaps make Putin do something reckless and dangerous. So again, and in Israel, obviously, the administration, I think, deserves credit for staying with by Israel's side, but only insofar as it was not a political liability for the Biden administration in Michigan. And now the course, the rhetoric, and some of the policies have been changing. So all of this, I think, adds to a very unflattering picture, which characterizes our reliability, and I think makes our friends in the Indo-Pacific, in Europe, and elsewhere really ask questions about America's future role in the world.
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting to dig into in terms of this idea of either managing the situations as opposed to resolving them, and it's sort of this we've seen it a lot in kind of this spirit of de-escalate at any cost, just de-escalate, rather than making sure we're actually doing what needs to be done to resolve these kinds of issues.
I agree that there are situations in which we probably should not be getting involved, and where there is very little in terms of American interest at stake. We should be very selective about where we choose to engage. But when we do choose to engage, and particularly when we choose to deploy hard power, we should be fighting to win. We should be making sure that situations get resolved as opposed to just being managed. Look at the situation in the Red Sea, where the Houthi rebels have been basically endangering one of the largest shipping lanes in the world. In response, the United States is leading an international coalition. We sent a battle group to the Red Sea, but that was in December. And as of now, the situation is still unresolved. I mean, there are still Houthi pirates. We are still too afraid to push back. We are too afraid to strike targets where there might be Iranians and Iranian militias in Yemen. We are obviously striking against Iran is totally unthinkable to the current administration. So again, these crises just sort of fester, and what perhaps once was a rules-based order is really fraying around the edges.
Yeah, definitely fraying around the edges. And I was going to give you a bonus point in your Wall Street Journal piece that you did reference the early 19th century U.S. defeating the Barbary pirates, which is a good thing for everyone to go look up at the Wall Street Journal today. I want you to, as we round it out, give us a sense in terms of how this looks. How do we see this as it relates to China specifically?
So obviously China is the big issue of the day, and there are those in Washington who say that we should be focusing all of our energy and all of our attention to China and to combating China. But I think it's worth understanding just how connected the Chinese regime is to other pressure points around the planet, whether it's the help that's been provided by the Chinese to Russia in its war against Ukraine, whether it's the economic ties between Iran and China, whether it's Chinese backing of the North Korean regime, and the idea that we can just simply focus on China while forgetting about everything else that's happening elsewhere just doesn't pass the smell test. It doesn't pass the smell test for our allies, who I think are very anxiously watching, whether they are Japanese, Koreans, or Taiwanese. They are very anxiously watching what happens in Ukraine and how much and how long we'll be able to sustain Ukrainian defenses. America has just one credibility, and if you sort of squander it in one place, we kind of squander it everywhere, and we'll be less relied on, and countries will make other arrangements, perhaps without the United States, and the world that has been sort of geared towards serving our interests to some extent might become a very different world indeed.
Yeah, very different indeed. And give us one final thought in terms of what we should be watching for moving forward, because I share your same concern that our allies are starting to really wonder if we will be there when things get hard or difficult or really challenging. And our enemies, again, are being more and more emboldened by this either de-escalate or just avoid or just manage as opposed to lead. So what's the one thing that we ought to be looking for that might change that dynamic and secure that place in the world?
Look, if Ukrainians were to win the war, I think that would be a massive game changer. If Israelis were to be allowed by the Biden administration to complete their operation in Gaza, if they were not sort of held by the Biden administration from going into Rafah and exposing the tunnels leading into Egypt and so on and so forth, I think that would be significant. But the real test, I think, comes when the independence of Taiwan comes into sharper focus. And there are already voices who otherwise are very hawkish on China who say that really there aren't any critical American interest involved in a future confrontation over Taiwan. And I think that's a sort of signal that will only embolden leaders like Xi and again, we might end up in a world in which, I mean, American power will count for a whole lot less in 10 or 15 years from now.
Yeah, great perspective, fantastic piece. Dalibor Rohak, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and fantastic insight. Thanks so much for joining us today.
But thank you so much.
All right, that's Dalibor Rohak from AEI, and really some important conversations there. Are we leading? Are we following? Are we managing? Are we going to run out of energy before we run out of opportunity to lead? What messages are we sending to our allies? What messages are we sending to our enemies and adversaries around the world? There's some crucial conversations to be had, and if we just avoid them, we'll end up choosing the results by default rather than by choice and strategy, and that's what worries me the most. We'll be right back.
What does an Olympic venue, Memorial Weekend, live music, delicious food, 20 years of family fun, and four-legged canine athletes gathered from all over the world all have in common? This week is the 20th annual Soldier Hollow Sheepdog Classic, presented by Purina Pro Plan, with a new date, May 24th through 27th. Enjoy a weekend filled in the beautiful Soldier Hollow mountainside, watching these top dog athletes and their talented handlers navigate down rugged mountainous terrain to beat the clock, using pure agility and skill corralling the most spirited sheep in the world. Experience 4 days of high-value fun, exciting competition, plus dog, duck, and bird demos. Petting zoo, face painting, bagpipes, and delicious eateries all surrounded in beautiful Midway, Utah. Save the date for the Soldier Hollow Sheepdog Classic, presented by Purina Pro Plan, performance nutrition that fuels more sporting dog champions than any other brand. Also sponsored by Powder River and IFA Country Stores. This weekend, May 24th through 27th. Details and tickets, visit SoldierHollowClassic.com. SoldierHollowClassic.com.
At KSL News Radio, we have a 30-year legacy of honoring Utah teachers, but we can't do it without your help. Please tell us about an important teacher in your life on the KSL Teacher Tribute Wall, presented by Cypress Credit Union. Each month, one lucky teacher wins a $500 gift card from Cypress Credit Union, a $250 gift card to Harmon's, plus season tickets to Hale Center Theater. Say thanks to your teacher today at kslnewsradio.com/teacher from Cypress Credit Union and KSL News Radio.
Utah, you love the spring, so don't spend it painting. Do what Mike did. He called Rhino Shield.
Our home is basically a contemporary with stucco finish, and we just started noticing that the paint was just fading and the stucco would just look like garbage. We had received a postcard from Rhino Shield, and we decided to take a look at it.
Rhino Shield ceramic technology is formulated for our unique climate here in Utah and is Class 1 fire rated.
The process with Rhino Shield and their crew, they were just very conscientious. We had problems in the past with painters. They leave debris and everything. Well, we didn't have that with Rhino Shield.
Now you can get the guaranteed protection of Rhino Shield for 15% off the regular price.
The thing about Rhino Shield, the heat gain has been reduced, and we save $70 a month. You don't hear that about any type of paint.
Remember, Utah, this is a limited time offer, so call now, 435-246-4466 or rhinoshieldwest.com. That's rhinoshieldwest.com.
Go Rhino Shield.
There's a lot to celebrate this month. Graduations, the end of the school year approaching, barbecues, and warm weather months ahead. Celebrate in a clean home by calling the cleaning pros at Zero Res. Take advantage of Zero Res's flash sale today. $25 per room with a 4-room minimum. You know Zero Res as the zero residue carpet cleaners that don't leave behind any dirt-attracting soaps and chemicals that other carpet cleaners use. Don't risk it with the other guys or go DIY with your carpet cleaning. It will end up soaked for days and actually do more damage than good. Keep the mud outside and not under your carpets. Just check out the 3,300 raving customer reviews online with a 4.8 Google rating. Schedule today and get one room Zero Resified, starting at just $25 with a 4-room minimum. Make sure to mention KSL. Book with ease at ZeroRes.com or call 801-288-9376. Zero Res. Spell it backward or forward. It's the right way to clean. Zero Res.
Common Spirit Health has expert orthopedic care that gets you back at it and back to your best. Find skilled orthopedic physicians at Common Spirit locations who specialize in general orthopedics and repair of hips, knees, shoulders, and hands, so you can return to running races or chasing the grandkids. Common Spirit Health. Hospitals, clinics, and caregivers all connected to advance healthcare in Colorado, Kansas, and Utah. Orthopedic care with human kindness is here. Visit mountain.commonspirit.org.
The Good Feet store, the life you love, starts here.
With the 3 things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, the body of a truck driver has been recovered from Deer Creek Reservoir after a semi went into the lake. The highway past Deer Creek is still closed. Second, protesters interrupted the Secretary of State at a congressional committee hearing today. Third, Salt Lake City officials say the man suspected of killing his son and then himself was a city employee. 58 degrees, partly cloudy in Salt Lake City. Back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Hear elevated conversation on crucial issues. Boyd Matheson on Inside Sources.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. It's great to be with you today. As always, I am Boyd Matheson. I actually want to go back to a conversation that we started last week. Got interrupted by some breaking news, but it's one of those crucial conversations, and it's one of those think again conversations as it relates to criminal justice, policing, what's happening in our country. And Billy Binion, associate editor at Reason, has a great piece talking about policing, particularly in black communities, what the attitudes are, what we should learn from that, and how we move that all forward. And Billy, welcome back to the show, and we'll get the full conversation this time around.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's kind of do a little bit of a reset for our listeners in terms of some of the things that you've been tracking and looking at. Obviously, there was a whole movement of defund the police following some of those activities that took place during the course of the pandemic and the tragic death, of course, of George Floyd. Give us a sense in terms of kind of where that has progressed and what you've been tracking in that space.
Sure. So over the course of the last few years, researchers, this is not a new thing, but researchers have been tracking support for police and for police funding based on, different demographic characteristics. So some of the most interesting data that I've seen recently was a study that came out. I think it was 5 researchers who essentially looked at how the chasm between how black and white people feel in terms of how afraid they are of interactions with police, which I don't think it really would surprise anyone to know that black people are disproportionately much more afraid that interaction with a police officer will end poorly for them. But then the interesting thing is that these communities are actually widely in agreement on wanting police presence and police funding either maintained or increased. So, some of the statistics that I found most interesting were out of Black Americans who respond that they are either afraid or very afraid of the police. 81% want to maintain or increase police spending, whereas 78% of those people want to maintain or increase police presence. And then out of the Black Americans who are not afraid of police, both of those percentages are over 90%. So the reason why I think this data is interesting and important to keep in mind when talking about these issues is that in the media debate, and this is not just about criminal justice reform, but the media debate tends to disproportionately give attention to some of the loudest voices, which often have more of the extreme views. I'm not faulting anyone for any activists for fighting for what they believe in. I write opinion for a living. Some people would call me an activist, so I'm not criticizing them for doing so. But I think that when the media gives such outsized attention to a very small group of people who are saying, like, you mentioned defund the police or sometimes even abolish the police, those people get so much coverage because they're interesting and their views, I think, are shocking to people sometimes, and they get clicks and views and shares. But they actually speak for like a vanishingly small amount of people. I think that's especially important to keep in mind when you hear people say that they are speaking, quote, for the Black community. Even before I started writing about this topic, I think that's just such an absurd concept because white people make up the majority of the U.S. I think people just assume that there are nuances and differences of opinion among white people. But just because, Black people or Latino people or gay people or whomever are in the minority, the idea that they would all of a sudden speak with one voice is just so absurd. I mean, whether you're Black or a woman or gay or whatever the case, these communities are made up of people with brains and who can think for themselves. And so even if they, might be smaller in number, there is no spokesperson for the Black community. There's no spokesperson for all women or, whoever we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so that was why this data kind of jumped out to me. I think the gut reaction if you polled someone on the street is, what do you think the Black community wants to see happen with police? I think the gut reaction would be someone would say, they want police to pull back, and that's just simply untrue.
Yeah, and I love that point. That principle is so vital. No group is monolithic. they just are. That's against human nature. I think separating that, I love how you did that in your piece in particular, and making sure people do step back and say, wait a minute, what is really going on? And we often call out the fact that it is those loud and often angry voices. Again, everyone has a right to protest. Everyone has a right to raise their issue. Absolutely, 100%. We always support that. And we need to be careful that we don't allow those voices to prevent us from having the real conversation. I think sometimes the loud, angry voices keep us a safe distance from having a conversation about what might need to change or what might need to be improved. And I thought one of the interesting things in your piece was not only the fact that that many of those in the Black community said, "Hey, we want more, not less. We do want better for sure." But then there's also kind of this cost-benefit analysis. Again, not ignoring the issue, but saying, "Hey, there's a lot of other issues that we really care about as well."
Right. And this is data from a different set of researchers, but one of the first kind of surveys that really got me interested in this topic was a survey that came out of Detroit a few years ago, where they asked people who were living in Detroit, whether they divided the answers among, are you Black, white, woman, male, age, whatever. And they asked people to rank what was the biggest issue facing the city of Detroit. And in last place for Black people was police reform, which I think is just kind of like a stunning result. I will also say, though, that, other data have been very clear that Black people disproportionately see police reform as a more important issue than other people do because they do have lower competence in police. And I just think it's an example of the fact that multiple things can be true at once. Yes. And our media landscape doesn't quite I don't want to say it doesn't allow for it, but it doesn't have like a strong of a currency. Things that are more simplistic and more extreme just travel farther on like a place like Twitter or cable news or that sort of thing. But it is true, the Black people, I think, or any community, everything in life is a cost-benefit analysis. So if you are disproportionately impacted by crime, which is a big part of this conversation, which Black people, unfortunately, are disproportionately impacted by crime, then I think that a lot of people would stand back and say, okay, well, police are a part of the solution there. That does not mean that they think the status quo is like hunky-dory.
Right.
A Gallup poll recently, I think, concluded that black people were 20 points higher on average than other groups to say that police reform is a pressing issue. But the reason the Detroit survey was interesting is that at least in that city, it was not the biggest issue to them. The emphasis on biggest. One of the bigger issues to them was public safety. So I think that if you are disproportionately a victim of crime, it is very understandable that you would say, well, how will I abate that in any way possible? And that doesn't mean that we can't fight for, improving, law enforcement accountability and that sort of thing. These two things are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and the nuances of all of that is so important that both of those things can be true, and that's how we get to the higher level conversation that we need to get to. Billy Binion, associate editor at Reason, great piece. You can check it out at reason.com. And love the perspective, and love one of the things you had in your piece, just that often the positive developments are inconvenient when it comes to galvanizing support or getting clicks or hits or getting an appearance on a cable news network. And we have to be careful of that part of the equation as well. Billy, thanks so much for joining us today. Fantastic piece. We look forward to having you back to continue the conversation.
Thanks very much.
All right, that's Billy Binion, associate editor at Reason. And again, it's getting to the nuance of the conversation. No group is monolithic. But when we get to the better question, we get to the better conversation. And sometimes in the clickbait headline kind of world, we miss it all. And so we got to slow it down, back it up, zoom out, and get to the better questions. All right, that wraps up hour number 1 of Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. We'll step aside for some top of the hour news. More Inside Sources coming up next. Stick around. We'll be right back.
KSL FM Midvale.
KSL Salt Lake City.
From the KSL Common Spirit Health Studios, this is KSL News Radio.
Utah's news, traffic, and weather station.
It's 2 o'clock at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bomas. KSL's top story this hour. The body of a man who was driving a semi-truck hauling propane that plunged into Deer Creek Reservoir has now been recovered. He was driving southbound on Highway 189 when the truck jackknifed for unknown reasons. Crews had to wait for the propane to vent into the air before they could begin their search for the driver. The Utah Highway Patrol says the body was finally found in the cab of the truck. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. One person is dead after a Singapore Airlines flight from London hit severe turbulence on Tuesday. New numbers on the injured from ABC's Alex Stone.
After the Singapore Airlines Boeing 777 hit the severe turbulence, a plane made an emergency landing in Bangkok. New numbers show 71 people went to hospitals, including 2 American passengers. 6 passengers have critical injuries. 1 person is dead. 4 passengers on board in total were American.
And your money at this moment, the Dow Jones average up on the day, 66 points right now. The NASDAQ was up 37. Our KSL weather looks like up and down temperatures for the next couple of days. KSL News Time, 2:01.
You know what's great about KSL's traffic coverage? Trained traffic reporters and real listeners.
Trading information and making the commute safer and faster for everyone.
Every 10 minutes on the 9s, we have you covered on KSL News Radio.
You wouldn't know it, but most financial advisors are put in a box. I'm Jeff Jr. from Trajan Wealth, and I want to provide you a little insight about financial advisors. Most financial advisors have to sell what their company requires them to sell, and many advisors have to only adhere to what's called a suitability standard. A suitability standard is a limited standard of care, not requiring what's sold to be best just suitable. Advisors with this loose standard often have limited investment and product selection. Trajan Wealth is held to a fiduciary standard, which is the highest standard of care in the advisory business. And that's just one of the many reasons we have billions of dollars under our care and attract clients from other advisors. Raise your standards today and call Trajan Wealth. Call 801-899-7600. That's 801-899-7600.
Advisory services offered through Trajan Wealth, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor.
You know, Deb, you and I have had this conversation so many times. We think, oh,
I wish I had a little more light here or maybe a ceiling fan there.
That's why we love Master Electrical. So anytime we have an electrical problem, we know we can call them and they will give us their upfront pricing guarantee.
Because we're not going to do it yourself. We're going to leave it to the professionals. And this upfront pricing guarantee is fantastic. I'm sure you've been bitten by bids in the past where they say, oh, that's going to take half a day. And then 2 weeks later, the bid and the invoice have nothing to do with each other.
Not only will you get their upfront pricing guarantee, but you'll never see an upcharge. Their pricing system simply won't allow it.
Master Electrical proudly serves from Logan to Santaquin.
They do everything that has to do with electrical, and they're always open, including for emergency services. The phone number to call is 801-543-2222.
801-543-2222, or check them out online at masterelectrical.com.
The IRS is the most powerful collection agency on earth, and if you owe back taxes, the news isn't good. The IRS is raising the interest rate it charges on unpaid taxes, and further rate hikes are expected. Most people don't know it, but the IRS adds interest charges to your tax debts daily. So if you owe the IRS today, you'll owe even more tomorrow. And it doesn't stop until you get right with the IRS. The good news is getting right can start with one phone call to Optima Tax Relief, America's #1 tax relief firm. Optima's tax professionals specialize in the Fresh Start Initiative, a powerful IRS program that can save you thousands if you qualify. In fact, the experts at Optima have resolved over $1 billion in tax debt for their clients. Call now for a free consultation.
Call 800-343-6460. 800-343-6460. 800-343-6460.
Optima Tax Relief.
Some restrictions apply. For complete details, please visit OptimaTaxRelief.com.
There's never been a better time to test drive that Hyundai you've always wanted. You're your journey. Own every mile in a brand new Hyundai. Visit buyhyundai.com or see your Utah Hyundai dealer today.
Traffic and weather together, brought to you by Dino Day. Celebrate on June 1st at all Sinclair locations. And here's Ricky Meese.
UHP has just concluded a slowdown to get a crashed vehicle southbound I-15 just before 7200 South moved completely off the roadway. But we also have slowdowns northbound I-15 going through Sunset and Roy up to Ogden, where we have an accident to the left at 31st Street. Celebrate spring in a clean home. Call Zero Res and get one room cleaned starting at just $25 with a 4-room minimum. Visit ZeroRes.com and book your appointment today. Zero Res. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
Weather will be cool today, high in the 60s, but tomorrow a high of 76, a little warmer, then cool again on Thursday with a chance of showers. Right now, 59 degrees, partly cloudy. I'm Dan Bomas from the KSL Common Spirit Health Studios. Listen online at kslnewsradio.com. We're Utah's news, traffic, and weather station.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Well, we're going to go to the counterbalance department to start hour number 2 of the show today. After the embarrassing display of what we saw in the House Oversight Committee last week, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee actually held a hearing, as they do every year today, with Secretary of State. Secretary of State gives a report of the state of the world. The U.S. strategy makes budget requests for the coming year. And maybe shockingly, there was no yelling, there were no insults, there were no pejoratives thrown around. And despite one disruption from a protester, the hearing was actually productive and professional. There's something to think again about. Let's begin.
Think you know the news of the day? Think again with Boyd Matheson on KSL News Radio.
Well, in the spirit of rewarding good behavior rather than rewarding bad behavior, as we saw in the House Oversight Committee last week, we actually do want to get to some of the substance of what took place in the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee today and the interaction between senators and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Of course, Utah Junior Senator Mitt Romney is on that committee and had an opportunity to ask his questions. And I thought it was really interesting where the senator chose to go, given all the things going on in the world. I thought this was really significant, and I want to dig into it. Senator Romney began his exchange with Secretary Blinken by listing some of the many ways China is pushing its agenda forward in the world and attempting to gain greater control here in the U.S. as well. Take a listen.
I just wrote down some of the tactics that I see that they're employing in their grand strategy. In no particular order, monopolizing key industries, with TikTok being able to gather information about Americans, Confucius Institutes to be able to promote their policies in our campuses, purchasing farmland around our military installations, selling drones, Chinese drones to our police forces, spy cranes in the seaport we heard about more recently, monopolizing key raw materials around the world, stealing technology from our companies, spreading dissension in the U.S. and through the West. I mean, it's an extraordinary list, and it goes on and on and on.
So Senator Romney choosing to really laser focus his time questioning Secretary Blinken on China. The Secretary of State agreed with Senator Romney's assessment in a moment of bipartisan agreement on an issue that really matters.
Senator, first of all, I agree wholeheartedly with the short litany of items that you listed in terms of what China is doing to try to pursue its military, economic, diplomatic preeminence or dominance in the world. And across the board, we have worked in new and effective ways to deal with that, to push back against that.
He went on to expand on a few of the ways the State Department is pushing back against China's attempt to gain greater control around the world and here in the U.S.
Two fundamental things have changed in our approach to China. One, what's happened here at home, the investments that we've made in ourselves with the leadership of Congress. We are leading when it comes to the industries of the future, and what I see around the world is people taking note of those investments and wanting to partner with us. Second, we have aligned in ways that we have not before with key partners in Europe, in Asia, and beyond in the approach to China. And you see that now working across the board to deal with some of the economic non-market practices that China engages in that unfairly penalize not only our workers and companies, but workers and companies around the world.
So an important conversation back and forth. Now, you may recall that Senator Romney has been looking for a comprehensive China plan, a real strategy as it relates to China. He's been asking for that regularly, often, sometimes very passionately in some of these hearings to say, look, hope is not a strategy when it comes to China. We can't just hope that they're not going to be a military might. We can't just hope that their technology won't begin to really impact and influence so many different aspects. As Senator Romney laid out that list, we can't just hope that they'll stop buying farmland around our military bases or that they're selling drones that are being used by our police force, all of which, of course, go right back to the Chinese Communist Party. We can't just have hope that those things are going to turn out okay. You have to have a strategy. Hope is not a strategy. Hope's super important. Don't get me wrong. Hope's a good thing, but hope is not a strategy. So Senator Romney got to specifics of what he's looking for in that comprehensive China plan or strategy that will last beyond the 4-year cycle of an administration. This is really crucial. Take a listen.
As I went through that long list of Chinese steps, those are the kinds of things I'm looking for. To say, look, our strategy is invest and align and compete sounds great. That may be an objective, but the tactical steps of what we're going to do country by country, industry by industry, port by port, etc., that's the kind of detail that really creates a comprehensive strategy that can be effective. And I guess I'm concerned that as we go potentially from one administration to the next, whether that's in 1 year or in 5 years, that we have a strategy that lasts. But we haven't seen anything of that nature yet, and in the law required that be submitted to Congress.
I think that is a crucial thing that Senator Romney is laying out as it relates to a China strategy. And I think one of the most important components that we have to think again about is what the senator's asking for is saying, look, we need to have something that's going to go beyond just the political cycle. So whether we have a change in the White House in 1 year or 5 years, we better have a strategy that extends beyond that. Now, you make adjustments and tweaks as you go, but if you don't have a strategy to begin with, you've got nothing to change from, which means you really don't have a strategy at all. And ironically, I think what the senator's asking for goes back all the way to the art of war, which says strategy without tactics is the slowest path to victory. But tactics without strategy is just the noise before defeat. And so what Senator Romney is saying, we have to have both. Yes, we need to have these high-level things that sound nice and good, and they're part of an objective, but we have to have the tactics that go with that. So you have to have both if you're going to be successful at anything. And Senator Romney is simply saying to Secretary of State Blinken and to the administration and to all of those in those branches of government and in those agencies that, look, it is time for us to have a comprehensive set of strategies and tactics as it relates to China. Because if we don't, then we're back to just hoping things are going to be okay. And as important as hope is not a strategy. I thought the senator conducted himself very well in the hearing today. I think those were important questions and important answers coming from Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who has just been crisscrossing the planet with everything that's on his plate right now, which just shows, one, how complex it is, but it also shows how interconnected all of the things that are happening around the world are, whether it's what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Ukraine and with Russia, what's going on with China and Taiwan. You've got to be able to move swiftly. You have to be able to take in information, and then you have to orient. Then you have to make new decisions and strategy, and then you have to act, and then you do it all over again. And Senator Romney raised an important thing. We're not doing that fast enough. We're not doing that well enough. We're not doing that specific enough, especially as it relates to China. We'll be right back.
Think again on Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson.
Gentlemen, start your engines!
The summer travel season starts. The KSL traffic team is staffed up with extra reporters starting at noon this Friday. So check in before you head out this holiday weekend with KSL News Radio.
All right, the one question I've never been asked about my soda weight loss journey, no one's ever asked me, does soda work? Because the results don't lie. Most of you know I lost 37 pounds in 90 days. That's real results. You know we're always about results on this show. I'm almost 2.5 years into my journey. Guess what? This morning, 37 pounds down. Those are real results. The question I do get asked is, how does soda work? Well, it's in the name. SOTA, S-O-T-A, stands for state-of-the-art weight loss because it is. It's state-of-the-art. You have your own nutritionist and dietitian who helps you every step of the way to make sure you get the healthy results for the rest of your life. You've heard me say it before. When it comes to your soda weight loss journey, there's no time to lose. There's only time to win. So start winning. Your healthy tomorrow starts today. So make the decision today that'll change every day for the rest of your life. Soda weight loss. Check it out at SOTAweightloss.com, SOTAweightloss.com.
Remember that first paycheck when you started working all those years ago? You looked at the net amount and thought, whoa, what happened here? Ah, the joy of taxes. It could be this way with your retirement accounts. You know how much you've saved, but if you haven't planned for Uncle Sam, you could come up short in retirement. With tax laws constantly changing, there's a lot you need to know to make sure you're not paying more than your fair share. Mike Stevens and the team at Capital Wealth Advisors can help you create a plan that shows you how taxes could affect you now and in the future. Set up your tax strategy session with Mike Stevens and Capital Wealth Advisors now. Call 801-210-5500. That's 801-210-5500. Make sure you know how these changes could affect you so you can avoid some of those whoa moments in retirement. Call 801-210-5500. Advisory services offered through Capital Wealth Advisors, LLC, a state of Utah registered investment advisor. Firm may not give tax advice.
My name is J.R. Bird. As mayor of Roosevelt, I increased transparency, led the charge to pass term limits, and kept taxes low. As your congressman, I will leverage my experience in the energy sector to champion energy independence and dominance. I'm determined to defend the unborn, secure our borders, uphold our Second Amendment rights, and bring the same level of transparency that we've upheld locally. I hope to earn your support.
Paid for by Bird for Congress.
It's been a rough winter for sure, but visitors are flocking to Box Elder County. Our feathered visitors, that is. Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge is busy hosting swans to swallows, geese to grebes. The spring migration is in full swing, and all that's missing is you. Box Elder County really is for the birds. Just a short 60 minutes north of Salt Lake, Box Elder County is the perfect place to make memories and celebrate spring, along with spending time with our feathered friends. You'll experience amazing restaurants and unique shopping. Come take a soak at Crystal Hot Springs, home to the highest mineral content of any natural hot springs in the world. Let the winter melt away as you relax and rejuvenate. Take in a theater performance at one of the live theaters or visit one of the fine museums. Visitors really are chirping all about Box Elder County. Check out visitboxeldercounty.com and see why Box Elder County is for the birds. That's boxeldercounty.com.
When the weather warms up, it's like a stampede, except instead of dust stirred up by hundreds of hooves, it's a cascade of phone calls to Advanced Window Products. This is Jeff Kaplan. Soon as the sun shines and the snow's gone, people want new windows and frames from Utah's #1 custom window maker, and the wait for installation grows longer. But right now, you can get near the front of the line by calling for a quote and get $2,500 off when you purchase 10 windows or more. That's on top of the incredible savings for the highest quality double-pane windows and frames, any style, any color. See, at Advanced Window Products, they actually build the windows here in Utah, they install the windows, and they guarantee them for life. There's no middleman, and they can pass the savings on to you. They even offer buy now, pay later. So get in before the wait grows longer and get the $2,500 off. Get your new windows this spring. Make the call. Advanced Window Products, 801-850-9100. That's 801-850-9100. Or visit AdvancedWindowsUSA.com.
Get the support you need for business success. Get Mountain America Business Services. With personalized service and financial tools, you'll see real results. Details at macu.com/business.
With the three things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, the body of a truck driver has been recovered from Deer Creek Reservoir after a semi went into the lake. The highway past Deer Creek is still closed. Second, protesters interrupted the Secretary of State at a congressional committee hearing today. Third, Salt Lake City officials say the man suspected of killing his son and then himself was a city employee. 58 degrees, partly cloudy in Salt Lake City. Back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Get deeper insights on the news from Inside Sources.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. It's great to be with you today, as it always is. I am Boyd Matheson, and of course there's been a lot of chatter and clamor around debates, presidential debates in particular. And of course, I think in what many are saying was something that had to be hatched before it ever happened, with a debate agreed on almost instantly between President Biden and former President Trump on CNN, and then an additional one on ABC. It gives us a good chance to step back and say, okay, let's really get into the nuances of what debates are supposed to be about and some different ways we can go about it. And someone who's always thinking on these lines, Jay Evenson, of course, opinion editor at the Deseret News, and joins us in studio. And Jay, a lot of things got cooked into these debates, including who would be on the stage and who wouldn't be on the stage, probably more importantly. Yeah. But give us a sense in terms of where are we, what are we looking at from a historical context?
We have to understand what the purpose of a debate is. And the purpose of a debate is, number one, to discuss issues in depth and candidates' positions, and number two, to see how those candidates act in an unscripted setting when they're on a stage and they have to react and think on their feet and answer questions that they haven't been given ahead of time. There are no scripts, and it's something to let the American people know a little bit better who are these people and whom should I vote for?
Yeah, and I want to dig into that because this is where my head has been in the whole debate. Is so often it is a moderator doing a really long wind-up to a very predictable question, sometimes a gotcha component at the end to try to spark some fires there. But often we're just getting a pre-planned, pre-scripted, pre-memorized answer from the candidates. And what I want to know from a candidate is, one, how do they think under pressure, as you described it? But I also want to know, how do they go about thinking about issues, whether it's guns or health care or anything else?
Yes, and a lot of it then depends on the moderator and how those questions are phrased. And one thing that has me very concerned about this is that you have both camps coming together and agreeing on networks and moderators. I think you need that third party. The Presidential Debate Commission is not perfect, and they've been accused of things in the past, but I think they serve a valuable role. You have somebody there who sets rules and enforces those rules, decides who gets to be on the stage and who doesn't. We have a third-party candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I'm not here to campaign on his behalf, but he's getting between 12 and 14% on a lot of opinion polls and is probably going to play a spoiler role. And there are some people who say people are supporting him without really knowing who he is. They're just voting for the Kennedy name. Well, we deserve to have him on the stage and see how he reacts to questions and see if we can get to know him a little bit better.
Yeah, and it seems to me that was part of whatever went down last Monday between the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign and the networks, CNN and then ultimately ABC, to control that, because it did appear to me anyway that there was a path for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. if it were the debate commission debates. That he would likely get it both based on polling numbers and then also on his ability to get on a number of ballots across the country.
The Debate Commission, I think it was in the year 2000, set a threshold of 15% on 4 major polls. Mm-hmm. And he's getting very close to that. Yeah. Whether he would qualify on that or not, I don't know. But he's clearly going to play a factor, probably a bigger factor than anyone since Ross Perot in that third party spot.
Yeah, no question about that. You also talked about in your piece at Deseret.com the idea of audiences in the hall, the pros and cons of that.
What's the purpose of having an audience there? Generally, in the presidential debate, they are strictly warned against making any kind of noise, and we've learned that doesn't always hold.
Right.
It's kind of hard to enforce that, but there's a danger there that the candidates on stage will be playing to that audience and not speaking to the people at home. And sometimes it can be really distorted. And I mentioned in there, of course, Senator Lloyd Bentsen and Dan Quayle, the famous Senator, Jack Kennedy. Senator Quayle didn't say he was Jack Kennedy. He said he'd had the same amount of experience in Congress as Jack Kennedy had before he was elected. And so it really wasn't even a pertinent answer, but the crowd cheered and applauded for quite a while, and it's something that we all remember. And of course, it didn't have any effect. Dan Quayle and George Bush won the election, but it's one of those moments, and we've had a few. We've had some really good ones. Reagan telling Mondale he's not going to take advantage of his youth.
Youth and inexperience, yeah.
Though that's a good kind of quip because it doesn't hurt anybody, and it's just kind of adds to the fun of it.
Yeah, I love one of the other historical things that you pulled out in your piece. It's one of my favorites, and that is that we actually do have precedent in debates to either have candidates in different rooms or even different parts of the country.
I would admonish everybody listening out there to go on the internet and watch the Kennedy-Nixon debates.
Yeah.
It's a great debate. They are so civil to one another, and they stick to the issues. And so for the third debate, they had scheduling conflicts, so they held it remotely. Nixon was in Los Angeles, Kennedy was on the East Coast, and they debated that way. And I'm saying, not for the same reasons this year, but because we can't seem to keep our mouths shut when it's not our turn to speak, maybe it would be a good idea to have the two candidates in 2 separate locations. And also, I like the idea of turning off the microphone when it's not your turn, and it's unfortunate we have to do that. But
yeah, that should be an obvious one, that speak when it's your turn. I actually loved it. The first Kennedy-Nixon debate, there was only one podium, and they would actually stand up and walk over to the podium and give their answer. They'd sit back down and respectfully listen to the other person. And there was even one moment where Kennedy gave an answer, and the moderator asked, Mr. Nixon if he wanted to give a rebuttal, and he said no, I'm good.
Right. Different times.
Yeah, very different times. What else has been kind of bubbling in your head, Jay, in terms of other ways that we ought to be thinking or rethinking, reimagining the way we go about debates, whether it's presidential debates or whether it's things here at the local level?
Well, the public's in the same poll that you talked about. The public says that they want debates and they think it's important. But when you look at the polls, there aren't a whole lot of undecideds left out there. And so you wonder what really is the purpose of the debate. I think what we need is an electorate that's a little bit more open-minded about things, so that they can look carefully at these debates and debate answers and make decisions on who they would support. We're in a place and time where there's a lot of false certainty out there about who we want to support and why. So that's been on my mind lately.
Yeah.
It's troubling.
Yeah, and I think it's up to all of us to lean in, to be engaged, to learn more, and to want to learn more about these candidates at every level, whether it's a congressional race, a gubernatorial race, a local city council race, being engaged. You don't have to be obsessed by it, and you don't have to be overwhelmed by it, but there are some pretty simple ways that we can go about being a participant, an active participant in it. And I think that's the key for the Constitutional Republic to keep rolling along. Jay Evenson, opinion editor of Deseret News. You can check out his piece at Deseret.com. Great thinking, great writing, as always. Jay, maybe you and I will host a debate, and we'll invite whoever wants to come.
I would love it. You bet.
All right.
Thank
That's
you.
Jay Evenson from the Deseret News. And there's a lot to be had when it comes to debates around debates. I have a lot of thoughts about that in terms of ways we could do it vastly different than we have in the past and get to not just the canned answers, not the predictable back and forth, not just the real nice zinger that the candidate's been practicing for a month to deliver at just the right time in the debate. But I want to know how they think, how they approach a problem. What process do they go through? What are the principles that guide that decision making? What would make it worth it for them to get done, even if it force them out of office in the next election cycle? There's a whole a slew of different questions that we could be asking that we don't get to when we accept the status quo. All right, we'll step aside for some bottom of the hour news. More Inside Sources coming up next right here on KSL News Radio. Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's 2:30 at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bomas. KSL's top story this hour: the other missionary who was injured in a car accident in Fresno last weekend has passed away. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints' elder Paul Harden died this morning. His wife, Sister Mary Harden, died immediately following the accident. Police say this was caused by an impaired driver. Congress has passed a bill to make sure teens can't get their hands on a product that's sometimes used in suicides. KSL News Radio's Alessandra Gurr has more.
The Youth Poisoning and Protection Act would ban the consumer sale of sodium nitrite at concentrations above 10%. Sodium nitrite is commonly used as a chemical for curing meats and treating wood, but when ingested in concentrated forms, it can cause death. While the bill prohibits consumer sales of sodium nitrite, it does not restrict commercial uses.
The act is co-sponsored by Utah Congresswoman Celeste Malloy. It's moving now to the Senate. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, you can call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. A Senate committee heard from bank customers today who've been swindled using the Zelle app. It's normally used to send money between people and accounts. One college student says she lost $2,400 to a scam, then had a hard time getting her bank to fix it. Zelle says it's working to crack down on scams. Your money at this moment, the Dow Jones average closing trading today up 66 points, while the NASDAQ was up 37, the S&P 500 up 13. And our KSL weather, it's going to warm up tomorrow and then cool off again. That's next. KSL News Time, 2:31.
We hope you have the right app on your phone for news. You probably have dozens.
But the KSL News Radio app, well, it makes our live stream super easy.
Plus, our talk shows are right there as podcast for your workday.
That's the app for KSL News Radio.
Achieving the extraordinary, getting things done. That's the Utah way. And that's Brad Wilson. He delivered the biggest tax cut Utah's ever seen, keeping more money in your pocket. And on the Second Amendment, when others caved, Brad Wilson stood tall, enacted constitutional carry. Wilson stood up to the EPA, sued Joe Biden to protect Utah's energy industry, and won. And when others backed down on illegal immigration, Wilson didn't buckle. He banned sanctuary cities. In the U.S. Senate, he'd bring the Utah way to Washington, taking Joe Biden's agenda head on. That's why over 60 mayors, 22 sheriffs, and leading conservatives across Utah are supporting Brad Wilson for U.S. Senate, because Brad Wilson's the tested, trusted Utah conservative for U.S. Senate. Join them and thousands more supporting Brad Wilson at electbradwilson.com.
I'm Brad Wilson, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Wilson for Senate.
Saving for retirement was tough enough for us.
Yes, and navigating markets can be challenging at times.
I understand. That's why at Fisher Investments, we take a disciplined approach with your investments.
Tell us more about that.
We take an active approach to money management, positioning your portfolio for opportunities we see ahead.
So all your clients get the same portfolio?
No, we tailor your portfolio to your individual goals and needs.
What about communication? We don't like being left in the dark.
We check in regularly to keep you informed on the markets and your portfolio.
Which means you'll help us stay on track.
Yes, our goal is your comfortable retirement. And as a fiduciary, we always put your interests first, because we do better when you do better. At Fisher Investments, we're clearly different. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com.
Investing in securities involves the risk of loss.
The life of a small business owner, keeping the lights on, calling all the shots. And then there's workplace accidents, 500-degree ovens, rusty nails. Danger lurks around every corner. Workplace accidents can happen, but there is an easy way to keep your employees covered. Talk to your agent about workers' comp coverage from Pi, or go to piinsurance.com and get a quote. Safety first, then Pi Insurance. Individual rates, offerings, and savings may vary, subject to policy terms and conditions. Not available in all states and situations.
It's Dino Day at all Sinclair locations Saturday, June 1st. Fuel up, saving up to 30 cents per gallon on Sinclair's top-tier premium fuel with Dino Pay. Come early and grab some Dino swag. Remember, Saturday, June 1st at all Sinclair locations.
Love the filler moments at a Sinclair gas station near you with DinoCare, our top-tier gasoline for a cleaner engine. Some sweet and salty snacks for the commute, and a big green Dino for the memories. Find a gas station near you at sinclairoil.com.
Traffic and weather together brought to you by Dino Day. Celebrate on June 1st at all Sinclair locations. And here's Ricky Meese.
Earlier freeway crashes have been cleared, but we still have some slowing. Northbound I-15, it's bogged down Roy to just past Riverdale Road. Southbound I-15, heavy and slow from Murray to Midvale. Put the equity in your home to work with a home equity line of credit and get 6.49% APR for the first 6 months. Learn more at cypresscu.com. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
Cool today with highs in low 60s. Then tomorrow, a high of 76, a little warmer. Then cool again on Thursday with a chance of showers. And right now we're at 59 degrees with partly cloudy skies. I'm Dan Bomas from the KSL Common Spirit Health Studios. Listen online at kslnewsradio.com. We're Utah's news, traffic, and weather station.
Inside Sources.
Inside Sources.
America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. Great to be with you. As always, I am Boyd Matheson. We often look to the Supreme Court as the place that we can have some trust in this nation. And sadly, as the fabric of trust has continued to fray around the country, we've lost that trust in elected officials and institutions of government. And even the Supreme Court has seen an undermining of that trust that the citizens have in it. And some of that has to do with the way the members of that court behave and how they do or don't deport themselves, what they do in terms of their conversations, what kinds of conversations they have, not just from the bench, but when they're traveling around the country or promoting a book or engaged in some other activity, giving a speech somewhere. Someone who's taken a deep dive look at that, Jesse Wegman, of course, is a member of the New York Times editorial board, has always written about the Supreme Court, law, and politics, and actually has a great piece in the New York Times about the Supreme Court and what we should actually be looking for and what we should actually be expecting from members of the court. And Jesse, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's dig into this. Obviously, trust in the institutions is always a big thing, but nowhere is that more important than with the Supreme Court. You've been a close court watcher for a long time. Give us your state of the court assessment in terms of that trust.
Well, you're absolutely right that trust is important in a way at the Supreme Court that it isn't anywhere else. Of course, it's important throughout our government, but the Supreme Court is unique, right? These members, these 9 people have this immense power, and yet they are unelected and they are appointed for life, right? Those 2 factors make the court undemocratic in a way that was, obviously done by design, but also that makes it extraordinarily fragile in a majoritarian democracy. So the court is constantly walking on this tightrope of, having to protect rights and strike down acts of Congress that may have been, passed by effective majorities, and yet at the same time they can't, veer so far from where the public is that they lose that trust, right? They lose the sense of public legitimacy that allows them to function. So it's a very fine line to walk, and courts have struggled with it. The Supreme Court has struggled with it throughout history. And this court, I think, and the reason that people are so upset today and the reason I wrote this piece this morning, as well as many others over the last few years, is that this court seems to be uniquely disregarding of the need for that trust, particularly Justices Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas, who are 2 of the most senior justices on the court. I think that is a real concern for the future of the court's integrity and its legitimacy in our system of government.
Yeah, one of the things that you pointed out that really struck me, of course, with a lot of the chatter that has been going on around this, when justices should recuse themselves, and as you said, that's been a historical thing in terms of looking at that. But one of the things you pointed out that I thought was so interesting was the fact that everyone has been calling for this code of ethics for the Supreme Court, and a very slow walk by Chief Justice Roberts. And yet it seems, and I think this is what you were saying in your piece, is that the fact that they created this has actually given Congress less ability to check the court than maybe they had before.
Well, so let me be clear about that. I certainly, Chief Justice Roberts has not distinguished himself in terms of applying a more stringent code of ethics. But I can't single him out exactly because none of his predecessors did either. As we noted last fall when the court first came out with this code, it's the first time in more than 200 years that the court has had anything like an ethics code. So I give them a very small piece of credit for that. But I just to be clear, the code, yes, I did say in the piece that the code appears to undermine existing federal law, and it does do that. Yeah. The way it does that is that it uses the word should. A justice should recuse himself or herself in a case where their impartiality may be questioned, right? The language of the federal law, the recusal law that applies to the justices is shall recuse himself or herself, right? A shall is mandatory. You have to recuse. Should is more sort of hortatory, right? It's what we would say is a kind of a suggestion. And in that way, the court is almost thumbing its nose at Congress and saying, we don't actually believe you have the power to tell us when we have to recuse and when we don't. So this is essentially kind of a conflict between 2 branches, and I'm obviously on the side that thinks Congress should win, and that Congress does have the power, as it has used over the centuries, to regulate the court in any number of ways. But the law is there on the books. The court has not. If the court wants to take up the law, if the court wants to hear a case in which the law is challenged as being unconstitutional because, say, Congress doesn't have this authority, they can do that. But then they're going to have to put down their reasons for doing it, and then the American people can see. I think that those reasons will not be very persuasive.
Yeah, it's a great piece, and it is a great read and some really great thinking. I want to spend our last couple of minutes on something in your bio that really caught my attention today, that I really love, and I just want you to weigh in on this. I love the fact that you point out in your own bio on the New York Times about what happens when you make a mistake. And the fact that you will take that correction and put it on your computer, because I love the way you phrase this. After all, anyone can spout an opinion about anything. To do so while hewing strictly to the facts is an honorable discipline, and I'm grateful to be able to practice that discipline here every day. I think that is so crucial for journalism in general, but for all of us to think through. And anyway, I'd love to just have you weigh in. How did that come about? Because I think that may be the most important thing we've talked about all day today.
Well, I just, I'm sure there's many Americans who think that everything we write is fake news. So I'm never gonna convince them. But I have my own sense of honor and my own sense of integrity, and we actually do. Every single person at the Times, is mortified if they get a correction. We do. We have fact checkers. Last night I was going through this piece with more than one fact checker actually. And they were just being so diligent and so helpful, and we actually caught a few things and corrected them, and that was great. And I'm so grateful for that culture at the Times and for that culture in the mainstream media generally. So, all I can say is we are decent and good people, and we don't like mistakes any more than anybody else.
Yeah, no, and I love that. And I think it's one of those things. It's easy to categorize. It's easy to spout pejoratives at this media outlet or that media outlet. We get it all the time, and usually it's people who are either instantly certain that you're wrong, or that you're lying, or that you're not just wrong, you're wrong and evil. And I think there are so many people who are going about it the way you described. That mistakes happen, but that's part of the discipline. It's an honorable discipline. To go about that with the facts. And anyway, we appreciate you joining us today. Jesse Wegman, member of the New York Times editorial board, and a great piece about the Supreme Court and our trust and confidence in it, how we maintain and sustain that. Absolutely vital. Jesse, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, again, that's Jesse Wegman, member of the New York Times editorial board. And I think his piece is really poignant. And again, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum or how you think the justices are or aren't behaving, there's some important questions in there in terms of the role of the court. The fact that Jesse pointed out, look, these are not elected. These are lifetime appointments. And that whole idea of a simple word choice, would, should, or shall. And that should or shall is a big deal, especially when it comes to a judge recusing him or herself from a particular case. And so looking at how they go about it and how they make that case and what needs to be in front of the American people, because to me, that transparency matters, that accountability matters, because that's the only way we can continue to have trust and confidence in the court. And I think we have to have that for the good of the republic. All right, we'll go ahead and step aside for one last break. Some final thoughts on Inside Sources coming up next right here on KSL News Radio. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Your neighbor Greg loves the springtime here in Utah, but he hates to paint, so he called Rhino Shield.
We live in a beautiful two-story home that was built in 1916. Really been prepped and painted very, very poorly.
Rhino Shield ceramic technology is formulated for our unique climate here in Utah and is Class 1 fire rated.
We really had a lot of detail work, and the team at Rhino Shield spent really 4 days just on the prep work, and we were so excited to see that. And the cleanup was just impeccable.
Utah, get the 25-year guaranteed protection of Rhino Shield right now for 15% off the regular price.
We've gotten numerous compliments, and we've actually even had some of the longer-term residents of our community thank us for protecting the integrity of our home.
This offer is limited, so call now 435-246-4466, 435-246-4466, or rhinoshieldwest.com.
Go Rhino Shield.
Join KSL in the Movie Show this Friday from 10 to 1 at the Salt Lake NPS Store, 1600 Empire Road in Salt Lake City, npsstore.com.
Looking for a job is lonely. Endless searching, phone calls that go nowhere, applications that vanish into thin air. What if you could link with dozens of local companies who are hiring right now with just one connection? That's Express Employment Professionals. Find us at expresspros.com. One connection, endless opportunities, and no fees ever for job seekers. Express Employment Professionals. expresspros.com.
Hey,
Hey everyone, it's Ted from Consumer Cellular, the guy in the orange sweater, and this is your wake-up call. If you're paying too much for wireless service, you don't have to keep having that nightmare. Consumer Cellular has the same fast, reliable coverage as the leading carriers for up to half the cost. So why keep spending more than you have to? Seriously, wake up and call 1-888-FREEDOM or visit consumercellular.com.
Savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single line 1, 5, and 10 gig data plans with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plans offered by T-Mobile and Verizon January 2024.
Have you ever thought about what it would be like to sleep under the most magnificent blanket of stars? Picnic in the middle of gorgeous Red Rock, watching Tony Award-winning plays in a grand outdoor theater. Have you ever hiked through a legendary twisted forest, gazing from spectacular cliffside vistas, overlooking miles and miles of lush forested meadows? Or you should enjoy great museums, galleries, shops, or great dining, all in a special place, combining beauty and all the fun you can imagine. Put the you back in Utah, in Cedar City, Bryan Head, packed full of things you love. Live performances during the Shakespeare Festival, spectacular campsites and cozy cabins, plus hiking, biking, and ATV trails everywhere. Or tee up for 18 holes of year-round golf at Cedar Ridge Golf Course. Or enjoy a friendly game of disc golf at Thunderbird Gardens. Plan your adventure at Cedar City, Bryan Head, and get to know the you in Utah. Details at visitcedarcity.com.
Don't miss the Scandinavian Festival in Ephraim.
May 24th and 25th in beautiful Sanpete County.
Scandinavian roots surround you with a genuine Scandinavian festival.
Fun, free, and unique activities for the whole family. Information at
ScandinavianFestival.org.
Featuring a Scandinavian Heritage Conference Friday morning.
Pioneer Heritage reenactments and demonstrations.
The festival grounds on the north side of Snow College campus will buzz with costumes, dancing, storytelling, entertainment, and
the kids will have fun with our parade and places to play. Delicious foods and beautifully costumed dancers.
Craft and vendor booths.
Lots of food.
Athletic competitions, car shows, and quilt shows.
Free concerts and entertainment featuring Glenn Phillips from Toad the Wet Sprocket Band.
Have you ever been to Sanpete County? Beautiful.
A short drive from just about anywhere in Utah. More information.
ScandinavianFestival.org. Don't miss the Scandinavian Festival in Ephraim.
May 24th and 25th.
There's a lot to celebrate this month. Graduations, the end of the school year approaching, barbecues, and warm weather months ahead. Celebrate in a clean home by calling the cleaning pros at Zero Res. Take advantage of Zero Res's flash sale today. $25 per room with a 4-room minimum. You know Zero Res as the zero residue carpet cleaners that don't leave behind any dirt-attracting soaps and chemicals that other carpet cleaners use. Don't risk it with the other guys or go DIY with your carpet cleaning. It will end up soaked for days and actually do more damage than good. Keep the mud outside and not under your carpets. Just check out the 3,300 raving customer reviews online with a 4.8 Google rating. Schedule today and get one room Zero Resified, starting at just $25 with a 4-room minimum. Make sure to mention KSL. Book with ease at ZeroRes.com or call 801-288-9376. Zero Res. Spell it backward or forward. It's the right way to clean. Zero Res.
Getting help with plumbing repairs is easier than you think. All you have to do is call Any Hour Services or schedule an appointment at anyhourservices.com. No one helps more homeowners than Any Hour Services.
Jeff Kaplan.
When I was a kid, my parents got me a subscription to Newsweek magazine. I would devour every page into the night. And to this day, I sit on my iPad looking for stories for my Minute of News, flesh out our coverage, and I get to share the news with you.
Jeff Kaplan's Afternoon News, 3 to 7 on KSL News Radio.
With the 3 things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, a member of Congress working to ban the sale of concentrated sodium nitrite. It's used for curing meats, but also sometimes used in suicides. Second, a senior missionary who was injured in a car crash in Fresno last weekend has passed away. And third, a congressional committee heard testimony today about financial scams using Zelle, the app for sending money. The company says fraud is rare in its transactions. 59 degrees, partly cloudy in Salt Lake City. Back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Hear elevated conversation on crucial issues. Boyd Matheson on Inside Sources.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. It is great to be with you today, as it always is. I am Boyd Matheson, and of course, you want to make sure you stay tuned. Jeff Kaplan will be joining you next. Cleanup duty. He will get you home safe, smart, and secure. He is here in the studio getting ready to roll. And if you missed any of the program today, you can always go back. Just go to kslpodcast.com, and you can go through any of the segments of the show. And I'm going to give you a couple that you got to go back and just listen to because they were that good today. We actually had Jesse Wegman from the New York Times editorial board talking about the Supreme Court and why and what needs to happen to ensure that we continue to have trust and confidence in the Supreme Court as an institution. And there are things that have happened over the years that have undermined that. It's the approval and trust in the court has never been lower. It's still higher than any of the other branches of government, but it's slipping, and that worries me. And so having that transparency and some accountability there, I think, is super important. And so that was a fantastic conversation with Jesse Wegman from the editorial board at the New York Times today. We also had some just fabulous conversations on a wide range of things. We talked about debates with Jay Evenson. You can go back and check that out. Jessica Gross talked to us about how AI is not going to be the solution to loneliness. And no matter how good ChatGPT gets, no matter how good the bots become, they will not replace that connection that really does get rid of loneliness. It may distract us. You may be more distracted for a while, but it doesn't cure the loneliness component. And so even the best of technology is not going to get you where you need to go. We also had a great conversation with Emma Camp from Reason talking about some of our schools and how we often have the wrong debate over funding for schools, particularly in areas of poverty. And we really have to look at how the money's being spent because it's actually more balanced than you think between poor schools and areas where they're well-to-do. The funding in terms of state, local, and federal money is actually a little inverted that way, but it's how it gets spent and the accountability for what gets spent that has a big impact, as well as how we support families and caregivers and those homes where that learning has to take place outside the schoolroom. So a lot of great conversations as we went through the show today. I want to round out with a couple of thoughts. One, I was watching last night Nora O'Donnell from CBS and her trip to Rome, her conversation with Pope Francis, and an important principle that we've talked about before that I keep coming back to, and it's this whole rise and spread of indifference. Listen to this exchange.
Do you want me to state it plainly? People wash their hands. There are so many Pontius Pilates on the loose out there who see what is happening, the wars, the injustice, the crimes. That's okay, and wash their hands. It's indifference. That is what happens when the heart hardens and becomes indifferent. Please, we have to get our hearts to feel again. We cannot remain indifferent in the face of such human dramas. The globalization of indifference is a very ugly disease. Very ugly.
That was Pope Francis and the interpreter there with Pope Francis. Nora O'Donnell from CBS asked about that in one of the Pope's first visits after becoming the Pope. Was to the island of Lampedusa, and he was talking about suffering, and he talked about the globalization of indifference. That's a really interesting concept, the globalization of indifference. I always think back a few years ago of the tragic shooting death of Breonna Taylor by a law enforcement officer in Louisville, Kentucky. And you may recall that as that played out, only one officer involved in that tragedy was charged criminally. So that's an interesting conversation for another day. But the thing that has always fascinated and captured my imagination was the charge for that one officer that was charged criminally in her death. The charge was first-degree wanton endangerment. And I remember the first time I read that charge, I immediately went to the Kentucky law, the statute, to find out what is the definition in Kentucky for wanton endangerment. And this is what it says. This is the Kentucky statute. Wanton endangerment is the extreme indifference to human life. Extreme indifference to human life. And I think there's a lesson in that definition for all of us. I think it's what Pope Francis was talking about in his interview yesterday, talking about this globalization of indifference. And sadly, I think we're getting to that extreme indifference to human life. And so the way Pope Francis challenged the world is, look, you can't, he said, you can't be like Pontius Pilate and just wash your hands, whether that's with wars or injustice or crime, whether that's poverty or suffering. You can't just look the other way and say, that's okay, and just wash your hands of it. That's indifference. And then Pope Francis said, look, this is what happens when hearts harden and become indifferent. And then I love the Pope's plea. The Pope says we have to get our hearts to feel again. We cannot remain indifferent in the face of such human dramas. The globalization of indifference is a very ugly disease. Very ugly was the way the Pope put it. And so how do we overcome that? How do we get past this extreme globalization of indifference? It's easy to kind of categorize things. It's easy to put things in a box and say, oh, that's suffering on the other side of the world. I can't do anything about that. But what about the person across the street or down the hall? What about the person you pass as you're driving into work or driving the kids to school? And so we do have that responsibility. We are fellow travelers. John F. Kennedy popularized the quote attributed to Dante that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who in times of great moral crisis maintain their neutrality, indifference. And I think it's time for us to get past the indifference of our day. In some ways, the digital world that we live in has made it easier to be indifferent because we can just block it all out. Or we can just say, that's not my thing. Or we can shrug our shoulders and say, that's someone else will take care of that. So extreme indifference for human life, we got to replace that, I think, by extreme reverence for every human life. That's where it actually begins. All right, that wraps it up for us on Inside Sources today here on KSL News Radio. I'm Boyd Matheson. Thanks for joining us today. And as always, as you go out into the world, make sure you see something that inspires, say something that uplifts, and do something that makes a difference.